Hello, I'm David Arquette, grandson of Cliff Arquette, also known as Charley Weaver in the entertainment business. This is a message for Glenn Corbett and everyone that he is sharing this lecture on Cliff Arquette with. This is a lecture on Cliff Arquette in Gettysburg. Cliff had a Civil War museum there. He was a Civil War historian and really dedicated his life, the later part of his life, to that. He loved it. He loved being a historian. He loved Gettysburg. There's a rumor that he even helped petition for the Gettysburg battlefield to be designated a national monument because there was rumors that they were going to try to build something on it. I don't know if that's true, but I always remembered hearing that. I only met him once when I was about 5 years old, but I got to know him through his work on mainly on the Hollywood squares. There was a story that, he was big in radio early in his career at NBC and later CBS, but he was he used to do his character Charley Weaver on the radio. And when radio died and television took over, he was semi-retired. The story goes that he was sitting back having a scotch, and he was watching the original Tonight Show with Jack Paar. And Jack Paar said, "I wonder whatever happened to Charley Weaver." And he spit out his scotch. Next day he called him up and said, "I'm right here. I'm still around. I'd love to come on your show." And he came on his show and became a regular guest. He started playing this old man character that would write letters home to Mama to the fictional town of Mount Ida. Although there is a town called Mount Ida in Arkansas, and for years they had a Charley Weaver parade, apparently, and he had visited that once in a little parade car that I have since gotten. As you can see behind me, this is a self-portrait of him as a younger man. But it was funny, he played this older character and then ended up becoming an old man playing the same character. So he grew into his character, Charley Weaver. This is another self-portrait of him. He was a huge fan of Norman Rockwell, so he did this in that style. He was a wonderful artist. As you see, he's painting the soldiers, the wooden soldiers that would appear in the museum. Different Civil War uniforms. Here's to who it may concern, and I guess it's a discharge letter that appeared at the museum as well, for a soldier being discharged. I don't see the date there, but this also appeared at the museum. It's I don't know if you can see that, but it's a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And here are a couple paintings that he did of the soldiers that appeared at the museum. He was particularly fond of their uniforms. He had a bunch of those wooden statues that he would display of all the different uniforms and all the different, people that interacted with them. Everyone from the French to the trackers and different stuff. I remember seeing them as a kid and being fascinated. This is a wonderful little painting he did of a caboose in this little house that says Mount Ida. If you look closely, little Charley Weaver character is seen there reading a newspaper. This was a painting that I'd grown up with, and I always wondered who it was, and I finally found out that it was his gardener. He was really good friends with his gardener. This is an interesting little piece that he had. It's like an Oscar, like an Academy Award, but it's a woman. It says Award of Merit presented for the outstanding Hollywood production of 1942. Film I had never seen, but it said Best Direction, Cliff Arquette. Best Film Editing, he won all. Best Performance, Cliff Arquette. He won all the awards. And then that just shows his sense of humor. This is a painting of his favorite pit boss. I'd say in Las Vegas or something. And that's about it. This is an old lamp from there as well. And that's my father, Louis Arquette, Cliff's son. It's a puzzle that we'd put together, and it's him as Isaac Newton for a Fig Newton ad campaign. It's not really part of it, but once again, his self-portrait. But I just want to thank you again, Glenn. I know he'd get a real kick out of this, and I appreciate it. I'd love to see your lecture some point if it's posted online or something. So thank you, and thank you from the whole Arquette family. We appreciate it.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry, let me get my head on my shoulders. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. I'm Charley Weaver. No, I'm just kidding. It's me, Matt. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Welcome to this special Sunday morning edition. Is it still morning? Almost, yes, of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have something that I'm going to enjoy. I don't know if you will. I hope you will, and I think you will. We're talking today about a fella named Cliff Arquette. And he's probably more commonly known, I think he is more commonly known as Charley Weaver. You saw I just had his head in my hand. And our guest today is a fellow named Glenn Corbett, who has become an authority on Charley Weaver, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you for having me. This is an incredible opportunity.
I appreciate. Well, listen, I appreciate you offering to come and do this, and Charley Weaver has fascinated me for a while. Of course, I've heard about him. I don't know a lot about him, except that he had a museum here, and he is the patriarch of the Arquette acting clan that we all know and love from various projects out there. And I just find that fascinating. So I'm glad to have you on to talk about this.
Thank you.
So, okay. Let's see. Let's start with, I'm sorry. And you also brought your cousin
Kurt
along. Kurt.
Andrews.
How you doing? Andrews. Welcome, Kurt.
Thank you.
You brought the head. Is it your head or is it your head? And he was just holding it.
He was holding it.
He was holding it.
The rest of Charlie's out on Baltimore Street in the back of the car right now. So. Too hard to get him up here.
So you just took the head
He's had a tough trip here from New Jersey and going back again. So,
just security for the head.
Right. So, all right, let's get into Charley. First of all, when was he born? Let's start in the early days before he gets to Gettysburg.
Yeah, so he's born in 1906, actually, in Toledo, Ohio. He's born into a vaudevillian family. His parents were both in vaudeville, and so that's where he, I'm sure, picks up his interest in acting and all sorts of things. Charley was, he grew up, with other brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable that actually we just found at the Adams County Historical Study, Cliff, when he was here, had left pretty much, I guess, most of his photographs that he accumulated in his own family history, and they're here at the Historical Society. So we actually have a picture of him probably about 10 years old. But he was definitely on the path to, being some type of entertainer. But he was much more than that. He was very talented. He was a wood carver, musician. He was an artist. He was a sketch artist. he was again, every time I turn the corner doing research in him, I find something else that he was very talented in doing. So, so he ends up pretty early on acting at Euclid Beach amusement park there in a little show, and he just builds and builds and builds.
And where's that?
In Ohio too.
Ohio.
Yeah. So he's kind of there for a while, but pretty quickly he ends up in a few places. One is he's apparently, and this is, I found reference that he did voices and noises for Walt Disney early cartoons. Basically.
Okay, sure.
So he's doing that kind of stuff, but he's more on stage acting again with comedy routines and stuff like that. And that leads him to radio, and that's where he really got his big stars in radio. He's on dozens of different programs. There was a story that I don't know how true it is, but when he was in Chicago sometime later, that he was on like 10 different radio shows. All this, back then it was all sorts of stations, I guess, in Chicago, and he would use the Chicago River in a boat and go up and down the river and go from one studio to the next. So anyway, he was always on the move, and that's part of it, is that he went where the opportunities were, and so you see him all over, and of course he eventually ends up in L.A. With radio again, with radio. So that's his. So he's building from vaudeville to radio, and that's when he starts to really gain national recognition in these various programs and stuff.
Is that also when he develops the Charley Weaver character in radio?
Yes, it is, and it's pretty remarkable because there's really very few videos of a radio program because they didn't think to do it back then. But there's a lot of still shots for advertising in newspapers of him playing all sorts of different characters. He was on Fibber McGee and Molly. He was on all these other programs, but you can see the development of Charley Weaver over the decades because he's becomes Uncle or Grandpa Sneed or something like that, and you could see it's sort of like slowly it's turning to Charley Weaver because he was a character actor in that sense. So that's what he did. So exactly.
So, do you know when's his first visit to Gettysburg?
He said that he came here before he moved here. Okay. He said he came here, and I imagine so. And I should mention that one important thing when he was growing up, he learned that he had a relative. I think it was his great grandfather, off the top of my head, who was in the Civil War. Who was in I believe an Ohio unit. And he was one of the basically 3-month guys, I think. Okay. And there's a musket associated with him as Charlie's growing up, or Cliff Arquette's growing up in his house in Toledo. And that's where I think he gets his interest in Civil War particularly. He's fascinated with it, and it stays with him the rest of his life, basically. So he comes to Gettysburg, I'm sure, at some point before he moves here in 1958 is when he moves here. And there's an interesting story about that, in that, he, again, as he's gaining popularity, in particularly in California, Hollywood and stuff, and particularly he moves from radio to television, he becomes friendly with a lot of key people in the industry, Jack Webb, for example. Mm-hmm. So, Dragnet was on the radio, and then it was also on television in the 50s, and then the ones most of us remember is when it was on the 60s. This is the 50s black and white version of Dragnet, and Cliff Arquette is on a few of the episodes, and he's friends with Jack Webb, who says, "Hey, Cliff, you like those soldiers up there, don't you, on my shelf over there? They're metal." He goes, "Why don't you take them for a little while and think about how you could recreate them in wood?" And that's exactly what he does, and he starts doing that. So he's the guy Jack Webb's the guy who suggested he carve wood statues of soldiers. It's Norman Rockwell, who David Arquette just mentioned here. He played a big role in Cliff's life because it's Rockwell who told him, if you're going to have a museum, you want to do history and Civil War stuff, go to Gettysburg. And
really?
Norman Rockwell told him to do that. Yeah, I actually have in my collection a Christmas card from Norman Rockwell that has Cliff's name in it, basically. So they were very close,
So did Norman Rockwell come here often?
He probably did.
He probably did. We don't know.
We don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried to figure out what more of a relationship there was. It doesn't seem like there's any significant archive up in Pittsfield or Stockbridge, I guess it is, in Massachusetts, where the Norman Rockwell Museum is. I don't think that I couldn't find anything, the letters between them. It would explain maybe a little bit more, but it's definitely him. There's definitely Norman Rockwell, and I'm sure he was here. So, and that was the two people that played a big role is Jack Webb, ironically, and Norman Rockwell. And they both, one got him here, and one of the others is think about having a museum of your figures and stuff.
That's why creative people need to surround themselves with other creative people, because they know how to give you the good ideas and some are petty and they want to hold on to them and they won't do that, but most I think do. And they know that, well, okay, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But he could.
He could, right. And I think they had a good relationship, all these people and stuff. And and again, I'm thinking in the back of his mind, he's got the musket. He's probably dragging it all over the country as he keeps moving from Chicago to L.A. and other places, New York. So that's the setup to where he lands here in Gettysburg. And of course, the other big important point is that what David mentioned, Charlie ends up on the Jack Parr show. Yeah. And that I think that's probably the final thing that makes him decide, hey, I got to move. I'm not going to move to New York City. I'm going to move to Gettysburg because I love the Civil War. Yeah. And there's looking at this thing for a while now, looking at his relationship, he loved this place. He really did. And I think, honestly, he would have stayed here the rest of his life if other things hadn't happened, but he would have stayed here. I mean, he built a house in Sherman Oaks, decorated in Pennsylvania Dutch inside. And on the wall, you can see the musket above the mantelpiece. There's an episode with the professor from Harvard who does Finding Your Roots, that show. Yeah. And Patricia Arquette is on there, and they talk about her, of course, her grandfather. They go trace history, and they found the Civil War soldier and stuff. So he was definitely, those things came all together for him, and he's like, this is the perfect place for me. It's a nice small town. And he comes at the same time that Ike is here. I mean, they're both, and they joke about in the paper. I mean, Cliff Arquette does about being the number one guy in town and stuff. But anyway,
so and it is true that if you're going to do something with history or the Civil War specifically, you have to. Whatever you're gonna do, you've got to go to the place to do it. You can't do it remotely, Right. And if you're gonna do Gettysburg, you have to come to Gettysburg.
I do, yeah.
And it still holds true today, I think. So okay, the Jack Parr show. Let's talk about that first. For those people who don't know, he was the original Tonight Show host,
right?
So that was the Tonight Show. Right. Was it called that then?
Yes,
or was it just the Jack Parr? Okay. Yeah. So, and then Johnny was after him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was a few other people. Yeah, there was a few other people in between, but yes.
But not as long as either one of those.
No.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so.
And that's in New York, too, by the way.
Not in California.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what brings him here. Right.
I forgot that. Okay. So he goes on there as Charley Weaver. Did he ever go on when Johnny was the host?
Don't think so. He might have. He might have years later.
Was it because he used to go on and he used to sell pieces of the battlefield? Is that right, for preservation? Talk about that.
So this is the thing. So Jack Parr has him come on the show. Charlie's in Gettysburg now. He moves in. I think he starts in New York City.
When does he move here?
58.
58. Okay.
So the thing is that Mike, his son, is working for a movie studio there, like in the archives or something. I suspect that Charlie actually lived in New York City for a while, but I think that's when he launches the whole thing. This period of basically 58 to 62 is like really a lot of stuff going on. And so on the Jack Parr show, he comes on. Charlie goes twice a week. I don't know if he does. He's on typically twice a week, my understanding, on the episodes. But he's living here in Gettysburg. I've just found recently where he actually went to Harrisburg, to the airport, and flew from Harrisburg to New York and then back again to come here.
Okay.
So he's on the show, and that is why, I think of him as really. I just gave the talk at the Historical Society entitled "Cliff Arquette Comes to Town: How Charley Weaver Put Gettysburg Back on a Map," because Charley Weaver is this incredibly popular character on the show, and he's got millions and millions of people, and he's talking about the Civil War and particularly Gettysburg almost every time. He brings his figures onto the show. They're looking at him. He's constantly talking about it. And so here in town, there's a group of people up at Gettysburg College who decide that, hey, there's, the centennial's coming up. This is 59 now.
Okay.
Centennial's coming up. There's all these junkyards in the battlefield. There's Stuckies. There's all these other kind of things floating around the battlefield. Hey, we got to preserve the battlefield, okay? And that's where the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association, as opposed to the memorial one from 100 years earlier, but they're the ones who set off on emotion, like we got to preserve the battlefield. The other big thing that happens is Parade Magazine, which I think is still in existence. It's in the Sunday inserts.
Yeah.
There's a 4-page article of all the pictures of Home Sweet Home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the junkyard, Colt Parks. Hey, buy a house here. They've not been built yet. I mean, it's all this kind of stuff is on there, and it gets the national attention on this issue. Okay. And so Charlie, a.k.a. Cliff, he's in town, right? He's having his museum. His museum opens in 59, but he's in town, and you can see what happens here. They go, hey, this guy, he's got a national audience. We're going to make him the chairman of the Emergency Fund Committee. And he's a committee chairman of one. He's by himself.
Okay.
And so what he does, he's on television with the little signs, the whole bit, and it's him, I believe, who comes up with the idea of buying a square foot of Gettysburg for $1. In Christmas time of 59, he's on the Jack Parr show showing it. Oh, send $1 to this address in Gettysburg. And of course, what happens is it's the Christmas gift for 1959. And the letters start pouring into Gettysburg. They said, in the paper, they had to hire additional people to open the envelopes and take the money out. They ran out of the certificates, so they had to send letters back. Oh, you'll get a certificate one day, and the whole bit. So, but honestly, he carried that for quite a few years. I mean, his name is on the certificate. You've bought yourself a square foot of the Gettysburg. And of course, what it says on there is that you in turn also donate this piece of 1 square foot back to us to give it to the Park Service, right? So it's a really cool thing.
So and that's the beginning of reclaiming these commercial properties that are on the, like Stuckies, for example.
Exactly.
Right.
And they come out with a folder. I just got a copy of it, bought a copy of it recently. And it's danger, stop, these big red letters on it. It's a flip through folder. It's not even a fold out one. It's a pretty high end folder for then. And it shows as a big map with all these red stars on it. And of course you see Colt Parks in there. You see Devil's Den. That was the first one they went after, was the wolf. There's a bunch of wolves here in town, of course.
Yes.
And so this is the wolf tract. It's sort of in the middle between Devil's Den and the Round Top. It's sort of like this sliver of land that was potentially going to be housing, basically. People are going to build houses. So that's the first one they go after. The second one...
like right down in Beaver Lake?
Yeah, right there.
Really?
Right there. There's a stretch. I forgot how many acres it is, but it's a stretch in the middle there. That's the first one they're really targeting. Because they figured Colt Park... those are all developable pieces of land. They probably can't afford it.
Yeah, right.
So the other one that goes at the complete opposite end of Mummersburg Road, and there's houses going up there already, okay? And they buy this chunk up there. That's the second one they do. So Charlie's the key guy.
So at first, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. At first, they're just buffering. They're buying buffers, right?
Yes, they're picking out pieces that are like imminently going to be made into houses. Basically.
Good.
So,
okay, yeah.
So that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so they got the perfect guy who's on TV week after week, and he throws in there. There's a funny article in the Gettysburg Times where some local guy here, oh, could you mention my business or something? And he goes, I had to explain to him. You understand? I have to work the Gettysburg stuff into the show anyway, right? So I don't have time for other stuff. So anyway, but he is the face of this whole thing, right?
Right.
And it's, ironically, the Travel Council's not happy with it at the beginning. Now, they do a complete 180 pretty quickly because they're looking at it from the commercial side of things, because you would think that the Travel Council, I guess, wants to bring more, they're involved with the commercial development as well. So anyway, the bottom line is that Charlie is out there for a few years, the face of the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association. There he is. That's literally the face of him, okay, up there. So he made it happen. And, he's Leroy Smith, who's, this really important guy in this town that no one knows about. It's the reason why Steinway looks like it does today to some extent, and some other things. Some of the things we'll talk about, Cliff's involvement in other projects here. Leroy basically becomes a really close friend of his and stuff. And so
Leroy Smith, let's talk about this because Leroy Smith basically built the Gettysburg that we all know and love.
Right. In the lead up to the centennial.
People over a certain age remember a lot of his businesses, whether they were new or on the way out or whatever. He owned
a lot of stuff.
A lot of Gettysburg at one point in time.
Particularly as Cliff Arquette. Now, one thing I should mention, some of this comes from Cliff's own writings that I got of all good places on eBay. I got an archive that Cliff had put together, and I got it out of Oregon. And the story is that the woman said she bought it from a woman who moved from California. And I have to believe that it was Charlie's girlfriend that probably owned this at the end, because when Charlie dies, his son came in, and I guess you saw the images of the paintings and stuff. This was paperwork that I guess they weren't interested in. I think that's how I got it. But here's the key.
Do we know who his girlfriend was?
Yeah, Mildred.
He
met her in the 30s.
Really?
He even said, though, he said in the newspaper, I struck out twice. I don't think I need to do this again. But the thing is that Cliff arrives in town when all this stuff is happening in Leroy. Leroy is a guy who was a World War II vet in the Air Corps who comes to town. He's involved with newspaper distribution, right? And that kind of stuff. He gets into the souvenir business. He buys Buell's company, all the souvenir stuff. Remember the famous map of Gettysburg? Probably the premier map of Gettysburg, the one you buy for 50 cents.
Yeah.
He's the guy who takes that over. But Leroy is also doing a lot of other things. And, of course, Leroy creates, number one, what we know him for is the Gettysburg Tour Company. And, of course, Charlie is a silent investor in this. He's not, you don't see his name in the papers being an investor, but Cliff Arquette is the guy who literally puts the tape together. He writes the script, and that's what I got off of eBay. I got the original script for the Gettysburg tour bus. They bought 3 Mercedes-Benz air-conditioned buses, okay, in 59.
Wow.
Okay? That's really something. But can you imagine, the licensed battlefield guides at the time thinking, okay, why do they not need us now? Because they're going to be riding buses through the park, and it's all going to be narrated with explosions, and look at General Buford over there, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, Leroy puts this company together. There's a few other key players we can talk about that are involved with that, and the other businesses he has with the Jenny Wade House, the Holiday Inn, stuff like that. But Cliff Arquette's the one who literally writes the script and uses all his friends. Bruce Catton's on that tape, okay? I'll talk about him.
I would love it. Is that available somewhere? Does Max have that?
I think he believes he has it. So
I know we've talked about it, and I'm like, please get me that. I'll put it out on the show, and people will love that. Max, if you're watching, please, Max. Please.
I think they might have. Even
please,
Charles
Max. It's not a very good Charley Weaver.
So he writes the script. It's recorded Decca Records in Los Angeles. And it's got Bruce Catton on there. It's got Hugh Downs as a close friend on the Jack Parr show.
Sure.
He's the narrator.
Okay.
Of the whole thing. Oh, we're going here. Look at that or whatever.
Hugh Downs from 2020 and later in life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Concentration and stuff, that old game show.
Oh, yeah.
And then Raymond Massey's on there doing the Lincoln on it. Now, in 59, Raymond Massey is at the peak of his career playing Lincoln in a whole bunch of movies, basically.
Yeah, okay.
The Young Lincoln, log splitter and stuff.
Right.
So Raymond Massey, he knows all these Hollywood people, and he uses a Hollywood operation to make this tape that shows up here. So when you take the tour, what's really interesting, in that archive, Cliff went out, and of course he's meticulous about everything. He typed up exactly how many seconds it took to get from the high water mark to the Bryan Fire. Okay, that's 15 seconds. And he went through the whole thing
Wow.
To basically to coordinate the tape, because the tape had to match what they were seeing, you know?
Right,
So if they
right.
got caught in traffic, the lady whoever's driving had to hit the stop button until they started moving again. But it was basically set up so that when you're looking out the window, you're seeing what they're talking about. It matches what you're seeing and stuff. So he was really smart. I'll tell
Yeah.
you. And that ran for several years. I mean, they had the tape really until relatively recent. Now, of course, it was redone several times, but this is the original one that Cliff actually wrote and recorded with his friends. So they're famous people on the tape talking to this 12-seat Mercedes-Benz bus with air conditioning.
Yeah.
That was a big deal in
Sure.
59. Even the
It's a big
Wax
deal
Museum,
now.
it had it on the bottom, air conditioning,
Yeah.
right? If you wanted to go to the Wax Museum, you had to know it's air conditioned, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a setup for Cliff and Gettysburg Tours. But Cliff is also an investor in what's called National Heritage Associates. Now, that is the company that was created sort of right after the Gettysburg Tours. Eventually, it becomes part of it. But basically, this is a company. The first thing out of the gate is they buy the Jenny Wade House. Okay, that's Leroy's project. He buys the Jenny Wade House. That's the first real museum-y kind of building he's got. He's got the souvenir business. He's got all that stuff. Leroy's that. But this is the first building, except for Leroy, of course, owns the Wills House, right? Leroy, before all this stuff happens, Leroy bought the Wills House years earlier. And, you know, Leroy, and this is a program we should talk about one day, because this guy played a big role in this town from basically 1960 roughly to, you know.
I'm glad you say that, because I've actually wanted to do a show about him, but I don't know who to talk to, because he really is, for people after, you know, 1960, like, he is Gettysburg, and you probably don't even know it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the things you see even today are because of him a lot.
Right.
He was, you know, listen, a lot of people don't like the commercial stuff, as Gary calls it, local crap. And, you know, but the thing is that, you know, the important thing that Charley did here, Cliff Arquette did, was bring people to this town. And it's part of the balance of nature here, where you've got commercial businesses supporting the battlefield and supporting the history for it. And sometimes it gets out of whack, you know, with the Stuckies and things like that. But it really is an essential part of it, because, you know, my argument is that if you took away all these things, and maybe we don't like ghost tours, maybe we don't like other things about it, it draws people here. And that's the opportunity then to tell them about the battle and to learn more about the Civil War and stuff like that. So
I think that's a very important point, is that, like we were talking before the show, I may not particularly like the idea of ghost tours, but I'll never be outwardly against them, because they bring people here. And if you know, there's a tour of 35 people going out and 2 of them are siphoned off and become history buffs because of it, then good. Yeah, it was worth it.
And it keeps the hotel's room filled. And I mean, I noticed, you know,
keeps the economy going.
Right.
I hate to tell you, it seems to be. I don't know if this is true. It seems to be that people that come here to these days, the least of them seems to be history people, like battle people.
Right.
I just see normal, regular old people walking around, going to microbreweries, or going on ghost tours, or going to a distillery, doing all of the other things that there are to do here. And thank God for it, because it keeps the lights on for everybody. You know, you got to have that other stuff. And so, unfortunately, I mean, I hate to admit this, but history is just not a draw for people.
You know, you see that because, you know, I'm involved with, I live in North Jersey, and
we pave over history up there.
We do. And, you know, I'm actually the president of the Patterson Museum Foundation. For your listeners, it's the place where both locomotives, the great locomotive chase, were built in Patterson. So
right.
The General in Texas. So, but it's so hard to engage with people. I'll tell you, most of our audience are our age, right?
Yeah.
It's trying to get young people interested in history is really difficult. So,
well, I wonder, do you think that was always the case, or is that something that's a little more of a modern issue problem? Maybe?
You know, I think it had a lot to do when you and I, you know, I'm a little bit older than you, but we came here. You know, I came here in the 60s with my dad and my mom. We went all over. We did Disney World and things like that, but he was involved with the company Military Historians, and he was one of the original people, Little Bighorn Associates, you know, and stuff. He was a cavalry collector. As a matter of fact, his friend George Rummel had a mini cavalry museum down on 20 Town Road, where it was at Chubby's Pizza? Is it? What's the pizza place?
Down on Wheatfield and Tawnytown Road?
Yeah. Is it Chubby's?
I think it's Chubby's down. Yeah. Yes.
And that
Cindy
was
says yes.
He moved to Gettysburg. This guy George Roll moved to Gettysburg, built an ice cream stand at Tasty Freeze or something because his wife wanted that. He wanted the museum. So if you go there today to Chubby's for pizza, you see this sort of rusty old metal building in the back. That was a cavalry museum. So we were here a lot.
Okay.
We were here a lot, and I was saying earlier that the cool thing for me was when we had the meeting here, and I think it was at the Holiday Inn. I get to meet George Woodbridge, who was an artist for the company Military Star. As a matter of fact, Charley Weaver used a lot of his images to sort of mimic the uniforms and stuff. But I thought he was a cool guy because he was an illustrator for Mad Magazine. So it was like, it was cool. I got to meet Francis Lord, the famous Civil War collector book, from the 50s. I mean, it was a great time. That's what I'm saying. It was a time where, it was a little unusual because I was more into the history of my parents and stuff. But it was a place for people to come for a weekend trip, and they brought the station wagon. It had all the other stuff like maybe Fantasyland and all these other things that were here. And it was something to do about that. But I think you're right that the younger people today, it's mostly electronic now, and there's like this disconnect with the actual thing, right? Yeah. So, and that's why the museums have a really hard time trying to draw people. They're building a brand new visitor center in Patterson, and it's not what you would think. There's no film in this thing that they're going to build, because that's what you and I are used to. Is like when you went to Gettysburg, you always went to a film first. Fort McHenry, you listened about the story. It's all these very short sort of clips and stuff in their new visitor center they're developing. So.
Yeah, to go walk through a gallery with inanimate objects sitting in a glass case on a wall, it's not going to work anymore.
It doesn't.
And and that sucks, because that stuff is cool to look at, but it's all about context. Like it's how you get them to want to look at it, and actually a listener and I are working on something, and who knows? Because of course, like every other friggin' idea I have, it's like $1 million freaking budget to make it happen. So it'll probably never happen, but who knows? Maybe it will. But it could be something that could be one of the ways, and there's more than one way, but it's one of the ways to possibly solve that issue where people would become more interested in the artifacts.
Draw them in.
Yeah, but you're right. Like if you're going to build something new, the way it worked for us, it's different. I can't remember what I was watching the other day, but I was watching something. They were talking about the 1960s, and they were talking about how people didn't know everything back then because there was no 24-hour news cycle. People read books, they went out, they played, even they did things with their lives. They didn't just sit idly by and look on a device and experience the world that way.
Right.
And so people weren't as crazy as we are today because they weren't inundated with all this information that stresses you out. And so to go to a museum, your brain worked differently back then. You could appreciate a museum. You could imagine, you could stand in the middle of a field and imagine what the guide is telling you because your imagination still worked. You have to get rid of this stupid thing in order to get your imagination back nowadays. And that's why I feel bad for the younger kids. Like they've got an amazingly bright future ahead of them, but they also miss out on a lot of real life. They're moving into a world that'll be all virtual,
right,
and completely soulless and completely empty. And I feel bad for them for that, because there's something to like coming home with your hands literally dirty because you were out in the woods playing all day.
Oh, you're on Devil's Den, running through the rocks and stuff.
And you get stuck in a crevice and the fire department has to come and extract you. Yes. Like that's real life. That's living.
Right. And but that was the draw, right?
Yes.
And I think that was,
Adventure.
we could say it was a simpler time and stuff, but it was the station wagon. It was, like you said, there's no internet. There's
station wagon.
Right. So, but that's, the kids experience it that way, and they don't do that today. So it is a hard thing. So that's why the places here in town, have had to sort of morph, into things like the Wax Museum, for example. I actually, that's my interest in this. I'm actually a fire guy. I teach at John Jay College, a professor there, and I teach fire science and things, and been in the fire service for a long time. Anyway, I have a bunch of wax figures, and they were auctioned off 10 years ago, and the thing is like that didn't draw people anymore. The fascination of walking through and seeing these dioramas of figures of Stonewall Jackson with Jesus in the back and stuff like that, on the battlefield, that was. It was all about sound and light and things. Cliff Arquette hired the top stereophonic guy here in town, Mr. Robbie Roby. He built the first major audio system here in town at that museum in '59 when they opened. So
and stereophonic sound was state of the art.
It was.
It's not anymore.
It's not.
No.
So the thing is,
now you need holograms. No, you do. That's and I think it was like 15 or 20 years ago. I want to say it was the Abraham Lincoln Library or Museum, whatever they have out in Springfield. They have a hologram, or they did then. A hologram of Lincoln just appears in the middle of the floor and starts talking to you.
See, that's
why doesn't everybody have that now? Like that technology can't be as expensive as it was 15 years ago. So why don't we have that around here in Gettysburg or anywhere really? It doesn't seem to be catching on. I feel like there's a sad lack of imagination, and I hate to say this because I'm heading towards that end of my life, but might be an age thing. The people who make the decisions, who hold the purse strings and everything, might be a little out of touch with what's coming down the road. And to me, when you're doing history stuff, you have to be thinking about the next generation, the one beneath you, not the one you're in and not the one that was ahead of you, because you're always going to get them because you know how to speak to them.
Right.
You got to figure out how to speak to the ones coming up. That's the tough part.
Right.
Right.
And, when growing up and stuff, we were used to the 60s version of all these things, right? So it's, like I said, it's, trying to attract. It's a much tougher time now because there's too many distractions that we have and stuff. So
far too many.
But the other thing about Cliff too is that, should we talk a little bit about his time here and stuff? And
go ahead. Before we do, I want to go back and kind of sit on the Leroy Smith thing for a bit. Yeah. Because so he and Cliff partnered with each other on a good chunk of these things.
Right. So along with William Ayre, Ayre, and Tom Metz, they were the sort of cluster around this new organization called National Heritage Association. So the first thing that they did was take on Jenny Wade. The next thing they did, which nobody knows about, is Cliff Arquette and that organization created a Charley Weaver Museum at Freedom Land in the Bronx. It was a amusement park. I shouldn't say it was a theme park or a theme whatever. Didn't have roller coasters, not that kind. It was a historical version of Disneyland, in the early 60s. And, of course, the problem with building a Disneyland in the Bronx is that things like winter come along and you can't be open like a big chunk of the year. It never really went anywhere. But Cliff actually built a museum out there. At the same time, he had the one here. And it was National Heritage that funded the work. So they actually had a wax figure of Cliff there that people could take their picture with. They also had a museum of relics. Cliff said he had, I guess people gave him stuff, but he also bought stuff in New York City. And back then he was buying from whoever, and so he had that museum there. And there was a ride that was part of it, which was like you're a war correspondent literally with a horse-drawn wagon, and you rode through these battlefields of Gettysburg, and there's explosions going off, and then soldiers are falling down. They're all fiberglass because they're outdoors. Right. Well, it turns out that Freedom Land goes out of business in about 5 years, I believe. And those figures end up here. So those fiberglass ones. So if anybody remembers the fiberglass figures outdoors or at the front of the museum or the ones inside, there's like an artillery scene in there.
Okay. Those
came from Freedom Land in the Bronx because they were made for that because they were, again, outdoors. So that's the other business. Now, what else they do? Let me skip to the hotel. So the Holiday Inn, and as Cliff called it, the hottest intersection in Gettysburg, Steinwehr and Baltimore Street, right? they decide they're going to put a Holiday Inn up there, but they got to go to Memphis. And in that archive I purchased, there's travel arrangements going to Memphis. And the only reason Cliff Arquette would have went to Memphis is because that's the headquarters of Holiday Inn. Do you know that's the first multi-story Holiday Inn in the entire country is that one on Baltimore?
Really?
They all were one or two. This was on a small stamp size footprint, right?
Right. So you need to go up.
So they had to excavate, to dig out. They did not move the Jenny Wade house. Okay, it was never moved.
No.
Okay, but it's right next to it. They had to dig that out. That they had to, I guess, basically tell Holiday Inn, hey, look, this could be really good. It doesn't open until 64, though. They start with it like in 59, so it doesn't open until 64. So it took a while.
Takes a while.
And I don't think the town was the issue. I think it was sort of the money maybe, and Holiday Inn itself maybe didn't want to. This was like a whole new thing for them, having elevators, something they hadn't had to deal with before. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that was the first one in the United States to.
That was multi-story. I guess there were two. There was certainly one. I think there were probably two, but this is the one that was five.
Five,
in
yeah, sure.
1964, and it didn't exist like that.
That's interesting because there was a Holiday Inn in my town in Parsippany,
Yes.
On Route 46, and that was at least 4 stories.
Yeah.
So and little did I know back then that the precedent was set here in Gettysburg.
It was, and it's I found that in the paper. They said that they went and talked to them and that they agreed that they would let them build this multi-story one. So that was
okay.
So you got that.
But the tour center as we know it today, the big parking lot up there, the Jenny Wade house,
yes,
the Holiday Inn,
the Lincoln, and Leroy had bought the Lincoln Will's house. The Will's house.
The Will's house. Now at that point, that was in private hands. It was a pharmacy or something like that.
Yeah, well, the pharmacy downstairs was privately owned. The building. And so he bought it for, I forgot, $65,000 or something like that. And but he bought that before this, but that eventually came into the fold as part of the whole plethora of buildings and museums and stuff.
Sure.
So that's going on. Two things that never got built. It's in this archive. This is incredible. So in there, they said we have an option on 50 acres. This is like a 10-page document handwritten from Charley to somebody who I don't know who it is. He's explaining what's going on in the spring of 59, of what he's involved with, how much he invested in this, the whole bit, Freedom Land, the whole 9 yards. He says we've got an option of 50 acres just steps away from the Jenny Wade house. Now, I'm thinking it's behind the water tanks, like toward the Mariners Museum, that. So
where that neighborhood is, where
just
the
south
football
of that.
field.
Right.
Okay, so where the football field is.
Right.
And a little patch of woods. Okay, yeah.
So just south, I think that's where he's talking about. Again, remember, Cliff Arquette, Stereophonic, Decca Records, right? All this modern stuff for 59 and 60, right? They're going to have a train ride through the woods, and it's going to be air-conditioned train, so there's no noise coming off the trains.
Right.
And it's all the audio is completely isolated inside. They're going to take a trip through the Civil War. They're going to go to the wilderness. They're going to go here. They're going to go there. There's going to be scenes in the woods going through here to explain the Civil War.
That's so cool.
And the other was I think it was 2,500 seat amphitheater where they're going to do live presentations of the two brothers, the whole story, the two brothers from Gettysburg and stuff.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to tape, this is great. We're going to tape the whole thing with professional voices, but all the actors on stage are going to be lip syncing because if we lose somebody, we don't have, all we can do is put somebody else in the job.
Right.
So he thought all this stuff through. And this is the same time when they're meeting with these investors from New York, some construction people, and I think they were going to do it. And in the midst of all this, they talk about, we discussed a potential museum in Arlington, Virginia, 10-story high-rise about more general about the history of the United States. And it would be like a cool place. It would have part of it be at a hotel. You could go stay there. It would be like a really modern kind of place. And then, of course, that never got built either.
Yeah.
But here in Gettysburg, this would have been quite something, right? And, it never happened. But go ahead.
No, I was going to say that would be, I'm agreeing with you. It would be something. That train ride, though, would have been freaking awesome, right?
Oh,
just
and by the way,
through the woods, and there's Confederates on one side and Yankees on the other, and they're shooting at each other, and that's very Disney of him.
And that's exactly what this was.
Yeah.
He saw what they were doing in California. He says, we can do something like here. there's a little mention in there. He says, we have some friends in the Park Service. Okay, they're in there because they had to sign off on this because it was right against, the edge of Cemetery Hill, right?
Sure.
So anyway, that's the deal with that. So what other buildings do we deal? Now, Leroy goes on to create Civil War Times Illustrated. He doesn't get the credit he needs because I've seen some people talking recently about
him,
it.
huh?
That was him.
Wow.
It starts as a newspaper. If you look at the photos on opening day in Charley's museum, there they are on the shelf. You can buy, you can still buy the ones or reprints, those original, their original newspaper version, like 10 or 12 of those. That was Leroy Smith was the publisher of that, and he's completely forgotten about this.
Leroy Smith,
right,
not only invented Gettysburg as we know it, but also Civil War Times Illustrated, like a lot, not just Gettysburg stuff, like Civil War.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because remember, he's a newspaper distributor and souvenir guy. This fits in perfectly for him.
Yeah.
And he's like, so of course the first ones he does, Lee on the move to attack or something like. It's all that kind of written that manner,
like sensational,
and it becomes
type.
Sensational. Yeah. It becomes so popular. He goes, this could be a magazine, and of course in 1961,
people still read magazines.
People were still read magazines, and he would print them, and of course he was still in it. If you look at the masthead in there, you'll see his name on there in all the early years. Now, I think what happened was it sort of took off on its own. And he's like, okay, you guys are on your own now, take it. And of course, that lasted to what, a year or two ago, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So the thing is, he was in that. Then you go about Steinway, okay? So you got the of course, Pickett's, everybody remembers now as Pickett's Buffet, but that was the Battlefield Theater, which had a small cafeteria as a side light, right? Then, of course, it reversed. The cafeteria became the main thing.
Right.
And so that was another company with Tom Metz for that. Okay?
So you could, in my mind,
yes,
you could always tell which was related to a Leroy Smith company because the font on the signs were very similar.
They were,
if not the same.
That's right.
Because you had because remember now, I think
that's
today,
where the buses came out of originally. Was there?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that was
because when this starts, you still get the cyclorama, and not the 62 cycloramas. You get the 1913 cyclorama across from Charley's Place. There's no parking lot there yet. So they start the bus tours out of what's the Battlefield Theater, and you see the combination. Ooh, come and watch the movie before you get in the bus and your air-conditioned bus and stuff.
Yeah.
So it all kind of, these are really smart people. They understood the whole thing.
I always thought that if you're going to do a tour business, you need to have been a tourist first.
Right.
Like, because you have to understand the mindset of the tourist, not the one who comes regularly like we do.
You're right.
But the one who's been here never.
Right.
Like the first time.
Right.
And then what is it like for them? And really the answer is overwhelming. And so that's a great idea as you start. When I used to have the bike tours, people would say, what do? I would say, you go to the visitor center, you watch the movie, you go through the gallery, you get acquainted with things, and then you come on the tour and it'll make a lot more sense to you.
Correct.
Because you got to get that picture in your head.
And that's, to me, as a 64-year-old, we always relied on an orientation film. We went to a historic site. It set the tone for what you're going to see, right? So if you think about Gettysburg in 60, you got the Rosensteel. The electric map is an icon, but there's no film. So this is the first film in Gettysburg is at American Battlefield Theater.
And was that produced by Hollywood people too, or what did they do with that? Is that still in existence somewhere?
It may be, but Gettysburg Tour sold the building several years ago.
Yeah.
And Tim was actually in there recently. Tim Smith was actually in there to see what diorama stuff was still there. And they did acquire a few things, but I don't know that I don't know if that film still exists. All I know is that the first version of it, apparently they didn't like, so they redid it. Okay.
Okay.
And so, but the point was, it was. Do we have the other one too?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
You're talking about this one here where Tim tells you what he really thinks?
Yeah.
Bullshit.
There's two versions.
Bullshit.
Okay.
One with a hard T.
Okay. So it all kind of fits together. All these things fit together, and Leroy's marching his way down Steinway. Of course, he ends up owning property that back up this 777 Baltimore Street, Yes. By the way, the first proposed location for the observation tower was going to go there.
Really?
And Leroy was involved. And then all of a sudden, you can imagine when they went to the Park Service to talk about this.
Wait, you're talking about the National Tower?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It was going to be
Right
strip
in
malls
town?
right behind 777 there.
Oh, my God.
Because that address is like iconic for all these things that
Sure.
are going on. That's his centerpiece. Right?
Yeah.
So that was where it was going to go originally. So Leroy's got, I mean, I'm only talking about that stuff. I mean, he ends up donating the Wills House to the Eisenhower Society, who in turn then basically transferred to the Park Service.
Right.
He was a very philanthropic guy, you know. He was a guy
Well, when you
about
own the
town.
town, it's
He owned
pretty
the
easy
town.
to be, yeah.
I mean, his buses were hitting the July 4th banners over Steinway. He paid to have all new banners put up so they go higher so the buses could go underneath, basically.
Oh, my God.
So anyway, so they're all together. Leroy Smith, Cliff, William Eyre, Tom Metz. That's the beginning, but it's Eyre and Charley that create the museum. That's the key. So William Eyre buys the orphanage. He and his wife buy it, and they have a partnership with Cliff even before National Heritage starts. So he's in town, but they want to get the museum going. They think they're going to open in 58. They open in 59, okay? William Eyre runs the building. Cliff and his son Mike run the inside, the museum part and stuff. And, of course, he's the face of the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so Cliff opens the Soldiers Museum. That was called originally Cliff Arquette Soldiers Museum on March 2nd, 59. So that, on the anniversary here, that's when he opened it. And basically it was, for the most part, the figures. So he's got 37 to start. I think he eventually gets 57 figures. They're all in little little display boxes, and they're on a rotating thing. All sorts of your stereophonic sound going on, images on the wall, other kind of stuff in there. And his intent was, I think, to have artifacts even early then. I don't know that he had. We've got pictures inside, and all we see are the figures and some of the illustration kind of stuff with panels and things. I don't know how far he got, but Cliff lived upstairs. He lived above the museum on the second floor.
Smart.
He was. And we have tons of pictures of him with his workshop upstairs with the lathe and all this stuff. He's drilling all these things and stuff.
So
and he's got his Civil War hat on. He's doing this stuff. And, of course, there's a refrigerator right there. And so he lives upstairs in the orphanage, basically.
Wow.
And his son lives there, too. And we just uncovered all these new photos of his son, like promotional pictures of his son smoking cigarettes in the basement. Mm-hmm. It's like because his son wants to be in Hollywood too. So this is Walter Lane helps his son Mike get into Hollywood.
Who's Walter Lane?
I'm sorry, Walter Lane is the local photographer here who is really important in Gettysburg's history, particularly in the '60s up through the early past I think the '90s basically. He's really important. He's the local photographer. A lot of his stuff ends up in Gettysburg Times and other places. So he's the guy who documents all these things. So Cliff is in the museum. He's close to Leroy, and I'm sure close to Tom Metz. And they run the museum right through 1962, basically halfway through the year, and something happens. Now we don't know exactly what happened here. But we know that Cliff ended up, the Jack Parr show was sort of going down. Then Jack Parr actually ended up leaving and coming back later. But I think right before he left, Cliff also departed. And Cliff ends up with a permanent position on the Roy Rogers show out in L.A. So, but what's really unusual about this whole situation is that Cliff Arquette buys 440 Queen Street right at Long Lane. He buys that house from the heirs. He only owns it for less than a year.
So is that
right at the corner?
It's right at the corner of Long Lane.
Right. So it was just
Queen.
recently sold, like a year ago. Actually, my cousin and I, Kurt, were driving by, and I so wanted to go in the house because they had like a flea market out front with stuff, and I quickly looked.
You should have bought it.
I should have bought it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have bought it. 'Cause my wife.
Then you could make the Cliff Arquette Museum.
It could be
right.
I'd have to probably get a permit.
Did he live in it?
I don't think he ever did. I think maybe he did for a very short period of time. Because he ends up leaving pretty abruptly basically in 62. And the partnership with the heirs is dissolved. And then here's the unusual thing. A few months after this thing appears, this notice appears in the Gettysburg Times. There's a requirement for the sheriff, okay, of Adams County to go after Cliff Arquette for $1,500 to the heirs, okay? And it's somehow tied to that house. I don't know what was going on because Cliff did buy it from them.
Okay.
They owned that house. And so he bought it from him. And, of course, Cliff eventually sold it not too long later. But that's the whole time that Cliff is actually here in town. So Cliff leaves Gettysburg, right? Where does he go? He goes to L.A., for the Roy Rogers show, but he also creates a brand new museum in New Orleans, okay, called Soldiers of the South, and he moves his figures down there. We don't have any photographs of it. I actually have an original invitation to it. Historical Society somewhere's got a brochure from it. We haven't found it yet. But the thing is, he creates a whole new museum down there in New Orleans, right on Bourbon Street, right across from Pete Fountain. Pete Fountain was a famous saxophonist, musician, really heavy-duty guy in New Orleans. He's very close to him, and the opening night includes Pete Fountain, all these other famous people and stuff at the new museum. He was thinking about apparently opening up the museum in Buena Vista, where in California is where Movie Land Wax Museum, Knott's Berry Farm. He's thinking of opening it up there. But I guess he thought, you know what? This is California. It's not a place to have it.
Right.
He thought New Orleans would work, and it was there for a couple years. And I got to talk to the son of a guy who was Cliff's associate. He apparently wrote a lot of jokes for Cliff and did other things. He lived here by Little Round Top, this guy, Joseph Cutter, and his son, the one I talked to, and explained some of the things. Apparently, his family, Cutter's family, was very much involved with the New Orleans Museum. His aunt sewed all the clothing for these large wax figures that went in down there, and his grandmother ran the museum down there. So that's what's going on. But what's happening in the background? Leroy Smith is the key guy here. He realizes that now I have the orphanage. I got really nothing going on in there. I moved the dioramas out of the Battlefield Theater Museum. What him and I believe what happened. So he reopens it with dioramas and these reenactors that are there every day at 4 o'clock. They do whatever they do. But it's not the draw that Charley was with the building. It turns out that, of course, Leroy, being the smart guy that he is, he realized the value of that orphanage, so he buys it from William Eyre.
Right.
So William Eyre sells it to him, and then I know what's going on. There's a famous letter that Max Felty has from Charley Weaver to Leroy, saying how much a good friend he is and stuff. And so what happens is Leroy opens the museum without Charley's name on it in 1965, and then in 1966 he opens up Charley Weaver's Museum of the Civil War. It's not the Soldiers Museum anymore. It's Charley Weaver's Museum of the Civil War, the American Civil War. It changes its name a little bit.
So when Cliff had it, was it ever Charley Weaver's whatever?
It was actually Cliff Arquette's.
It was Cliff Arquette's
Soldiers Museum in the brochures.
Okay.
But then he realized he's got to put him on the face of the thing, right? He's got to have him
That's
on
who
there.
everybody knows and loves. Sorry,
And
Charlie,
so-
your hat's a little off there. There we go.
And by the way, that's one of the hats. That's a souvenir hat that was sold right down the block here. So can you imagine if he was around today? He'd be on your show weekly here. Okay, can you imagine how fun that would be to have this guy with jokes?
I would just wish we had one person who was interested in entertainment around here. Yes, it would be great.
He'd come right down Baltimore Street.
I know.
He could have set him up in the house again. He could have bought 440 Queen Street back and moved him in. He would have come right down.
I think that's what's so fascinating to me about him is he seems to have seen Gettysburg the way I see it. And that is that it's got so much more potential than what it is, and he found a sympathetic
like-minded guy with
Leroy, and they were able to make that happen.
They did,
and I think people, since then it seems to have been that we've gotten less fun in our thinking about how we approach the history. And
that's a key point.
It is a key point because we don't. Now, I'm not saying we need to be building
Crazy.
Stuckies or
a slide or something like that or whatever on the battlefield. But
I mean, I think people, and I hate to put this at the feet of the ghost tours, and I could be completely wrong, but I think many history people are so repulsed by the ghost tour thing that they don't want to do what we do, which is mix humor and fun with all this stuff.
Draws people in.
Yeah, but they don't see it that way because they're like, well, the ghost tours are just such an abomination that like, oh, we can't be fun. We have to be serious. But all it does is put people to sleep. Unless you're in the choir. Like if you're preaching the choir, that's one thing. But to me, the choir is going to help you convert the masses. That's the way I always look at it. And and so Charley seems to have gotten that same idea where it's like, you know, if this is going to continue, if this is going to live, if we're going to appreciate this stuff, we've got to meet the people where they are, not yell at them to be where we want them to be.
Put them in our box. Yeah. You must only look at brigade movements and stuff like that, right? Because that has an audience, but it's not the bigger audience, right? And
that's the diehards are
the diehards.
That. Yeah, and they're going to get there on their own because they're naturally drawn to that stuff. Right. And all you need to do is hear it once, and you're like, I'm hooked. Right. But the average Joe, who never thinks twice about history. Right. And
he's only here for 3 days.
He remembers, he comes here and he sees Charley Weaver and he goes into Charley Weaver's museum. He buys a souvenir. Yeah. Maybe he buys a little book. Yeah. And he's like, oh, this is pretty interesting.
He stole Stork's book, by the way. Charley stole Stork's book in the museum.
Whose?
Stork. You know, there's that guidebook.
Oh, yeah.
And I could see it in the photographs. I have one in my collection signed Charley Weaver, and it's definitely his signature. So he was in there. Kids would come in, oh, here's a great book. Right. You know, he sold Leroy's maps. I mean, you know.
And psychologically, that's creating a good memory for that kid who's going to associate that with Gettysburg and maybe, therefore, history down the road. Yeah, I know. It's a shame. We've gone very
But could you imagine if we had maybe this is the place to do it. Have a meeting of the minds. Get Kevin from the ghost tour groups, right? Get them all here and have the lead battlefield guides meet in one room at one time. Say, look, let's intermingle here a little bit. I know there's a lot of tension here, but could you imagine if the licensed battlefield guides gave historical detail information in a lecture format for those guys so they can incorporate it in their ghost tours so that
if they like work together. Yeah, I know.
I mean, listen, I know it's oil and water. I get it.
But it's not just that. It's just everybody's oil and water around. Nobody wants to work together. They want to have, and that's what I tried to do for the first few years of this. And I realized last year that nobody wants that. They want to be an island, and good, let them be an island because that's the 20th century way of thinking. So who cares? You know, as long as you realize you're in the 21st century and you start thinking that way, then you don't need to work with everybody.
No, but this is a guy that understood that. Leroy Smith understood. So Leroy says, Charley, Cliff, come on back. We're going to repopulate the museum. We're going to put a figure of you in the front, right in the hallway, so that when you're not here, because you're not here most of the time, kids can go up to it, take their picture with it, the whole bit, and have other kind of Charley Weaver stuff sprinkled through the museum. They actually had the model of Lincoln's memorial model that we believe a guy I know owns it now. It's the actual one of the models for the Lincoln Memorial in D.C. from the French design, Chester French designed the memorial. So he's, like I said, he comes back for the opening in '66. They have a parade in town for him, basically. Welcome back, Cliff Arquette. So they realize most people in town we like this guy and we want him back again. And so he's here. He brings his figures here, right? So he's got more of them now. They put them on display. The museum over the years it morphs into more militaria, has other collections and stuff like that. The wax figures, including the Freedom Lands fiberglass ones, they create a Confederate encampment in the woods. Okay. And that's where he lived.
Where was the woods?
If you want to, it's a set of woods.
I'm
sorry, it's in the building. Museum. Yeah, okay, it's like a whole room with this curvy path through it, and it's dark, and there's trees, and there's campfires, and he's sitting right in the campfire. That's where he came. So Cliff Arquette had a tough life. He was in the museum, in the front of the museum for many years. But then he ends up as a Confederate soldier inside the encampment, and his figure was taken out of his hand, and he's got cards. He's playing a card game in the thing. So anyway, that's where he was before, until the time the museum closed. So the museum morphed over the years, and of course, Cliff comes back. He comes back one time for the July 4th parade here, and he drives the General Meade steam fire engine down Baltimore Street with the horses. Okay, he's up in the he's up in the seat, and his grandchildren are growing up in Virginia. So Louis Arquette and the Arquette family lived in a commune there. Okay, and if you watch that show with Patricia, she talks about that a little bit. So on July 4th, we have a photograph of Cliff with Rosanna Arquette. Her name is actually Lisa, but her other name is Roseanne, and Richmond, who was also an actor, but we don't know. You know, he wasn't as notable, perhaps name-wise, as his brothers and sisters, basically. So,
did he die?
No, he's alive. He's alive. They're all alive except for Alexis. She passed away.
Right.
So, but they all are. You know, they all fell in line with the family. So their father, Mike, who worked here in the museum, you know, he went ahead and he ended up going to Hollywood. And I bet you those photographs that Walter Lane took here around the battlefield into the basement with him smoking a cigarette with a tie on, like a real movie studio kind of shot. He went around with those, and it probably got him some jobs years ago.
Sure,
you know, and stuff.
Sure.
So, and those pictures were taken here. So.
Hey, it's funny. So I was telling you beforehand, I was listening to the Gilbert Gottfried podcast several years ago before I moved back here, but right before I moved back here. And Rosanna Arquette was on. And I don't even remember what they were talking about, but it wasn't Gettysburg.
Right.
But she mentioned in passing memories of coming to visit her grandfather in Gettysburg. It might have even been talking about living in the commune in Virginia and popping up to see Grandpa in Gettysburg or something like that. Yeah,
July 4th, 67. Well, she was here. Right.
There you go. So that might have been it. I'll have to go back and try to find that and see what she was talking about exactly. But I just thought that was really cool. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And I mean, I knew about Cliff Arquette, but I didn't know that the Arquette actors were here.
And Mike was working in the museum.
And Louis, yeah. So now you say Mike, but we know him as Louis Arquette. What's the deal with that?
They called him Mike, I think, normally.
Like a middle name?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I have to look. But he was the guy that ran the museum when Cliff went to Jack Parr or something like that. So Mike was the guy running the museum here.
Louis Michael Arquette.
Yeah, Louis Michael Arquette. So he, like I said, he grew up here, you know.
Rosanna Lisa Arquette. So her middle name is Lisa.
Right.
Okay.
So they came, but Charlie came one more time. Cliff Arquette came to Gettysburg one more time. And I got my little sheet here.
While you're looking, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching and you want to call in, if you have a question, the number is 717-420-1978. Call now. He
was here on July 15th of 74. And I don't have a picture of him. I have one photograph from the Highland Sky Historic Society, which I believe was taken that day because there's a tint to it. There's interior shots of Walter Lane's wife in front of the exhibits and stuff like that.
Right.
There's one shot of him in the middle of Baltimore Street like this, okay? Now, you have to understand, Charley Weaver goes for Roy Rogers to California for that show, but then
Delicious.
What happens, they got rid of them all in North Jersey. We don't have any more. There used to be one in Midland Park.
I thought you have them on those rest stops.
They're on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, so... But
it's a shame.
It is a shame.
The roast beef sandwich is great.
Roast beef sandwich is right. And the Fixin's bar. Okay.
Oh, yeah, the Fixin's bar. Can't go wrong with
that. So Cliff ends up on the Hollywood Squares, and that's where most people know about him today.
Right.
Hollywood Squares. And he's on that program the rest of his life. And he unfortunately, in 72, he has a heart attack followed by a stroke, okay? And he's out of commission for a while. He's got an apartment. He's got an aide helping him. I know if Miriam, his last lady friend, was around at that point in 72. But they get him back to somewhat to health. If you look at later pictures of him in Hollywood Squares, you notice how thin he is because he lost a lot of weight because of the stroke and the heart attack. But he builds himself back up, and he's here on July 15th of 74 to meet with Leroy Smith. And so he's here. He ends up, the last dated photograph we have of him is he's the best man at, what's his name?
For the
Sanford and Son.
Star.
Demond Wilson, I forgot his name. Sanford and Son.
Lamont. I'll look it up.
Yeah. So he's the best man for that guy's wedding. Okay, we have a picture of him 2 months before he dies.
The son on Sanford and Son.
Yeah, the son of Sanford and Son.
Wait a second. He was his best man.
Yes, at his wedding.
They have a photo.
Really?
Not Charlie's wedding.
But they're like decades apart.
They are, but they're both comedians. That's why. So I think that's what it was.
Okay.
And there's a picture of them with Charlie next to the bride and groom at this table. He's leaning in, to be the guy. And he looks much better in that photograph. So he gained some weight back again.
Demond Wilson. Lamont
yeah.
Sanford is the character's name.
Okay,
yeah.
So
that show was great.
it was. So anyway, Charlie knew him, and he was the best man at his wedding. So 2 months later, unfortunately, Charlie has a heart attack and dies. And I have one photograph undated of Miriam and him that I got off of eBay again, that I got a ship from India. Now, how it ended up there, I don't know. It's like a press photo from a London newspaper of Charlie in their apartment. It's probably taken at the same time because it looks good. And one of Cliff Arquette's friend was this guy, Dave Willick. He started with him on radio and then on television. They both worked in Willick's wood shop. It's this gigantic wood shop where they made all sorts of stuff, the two of them, just for fun,
Mm-hmm.
And so it turns out that Willick says in his obituary that, he was, Mildred was Miriam was his friend, and implying that they were going to get married at some point and stuff. So I really believe that this archive that came through eBay to me was probably material that was left when Mike/Louis Arquette came to his apartment or house to figure out, okay, now what do we do with Dad's stuff? That things you saw on the video at the beginning of this program where David Arquette walks around with a self-portrait, that picture is shown many times here in Gettysburg on the wall. You can see it in the back there. So stuff like that, I think those kind of things went to the different children. So some of the soldiers went to the children. Apparently David didn't get that, Patricia did. But I think the archive, I'm imagining that Miriam is here and she's probably, visits him all the time, of course, and knows the stuff. And they probably said, look, do you want these photos and other kind of stuff? And this was with it because it was a package of things that was clear. Because what was in there also was his sketch for the museum here. And it's got all his friends, Tennessee Henry Ford, Jack Parr, Lewis himself as a figure in the museum, okay? Jonathan Winters, he lives in Walden, New Jersey now too. Jonathan Winters does, from that Zouave, Louisiana Zouave nurse out, the two of them, okay? So I think that's how it ended up getting to me, was through different people, because it was all together. It wasn't like all separate stuff. It's like somebody had a box of stuff and it went that way. Because I bought other stuff from this woman in Oregon where I got it from, that Cliff must have kept. Somebody, Burlington, New Jersey's car dealership for Buicks or whatever, sent him this beautiful album of him going there to open the dealership up. And he's got, what has he got there? He's got all Civil War stuff. And I showed it in the program yesterday at the Historical Society. You can see behind him, he's signing a book, Letters from Mama to this girl. You see behind him, there's the buy a square foot sign there with a donation box at a car dealership in Burlington County, New Jersey. So
Really?
So he was really, like I said, he was really into this, and he really wanted to help a lot.
You mentioned the Letters from Mama.
Yes.
I have a clip here. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 4 minutes, but he's on the Merv Griffin show, and he does Letters from Mama. So let's listen to just a little bit of that here.
Bring me a letter?
Oh, I got a letter from Mama. She wanted you to hear all the news.
I can't wait. It's been months since I've heard
She
about
wrote in longhand, you know.
Did she?
Oh, she's got a hand this long.
That's the first bad one.
That's the one of the bit. Now, you can't read
I
it,
will
you
look.
know.
I will look.
She says, Dear Peyton, Mom always wanted me to have my own place. You like it?
I love it.
Things are fine in Mount Ida, she goes on.
Yeah.
And on and on. Leonard Box has quit his job at the Eagle Laundry.
Who?
Leonard Box.
Oh, yeah.
You remember Leonard?
Oh, yes.
Little bitty fella.
Yeah.
Had a very small head.
Did he?
Yeah, I don't know why, but he did. He's quit his job at the Eagle Laundry. He says there's no future in washing eagles. Yeah, hello, Robbie. How are you? Hey, Johnny. How'd you get home the other night? Just lay there all night, huh? However, he got another job the same day, Leonard did.
Good.
He started to work at the Mount Ida massage parlor. But the manager fired him at the end of the first day.
What'd he do?
Seems he kept rubbing people the wrong way. Not funny, but very quaint. Ludlow Bean came over to our
Who?
house. Ludlow Bean.
Ludlow
You
Bean.
remember Ludlow?
Yeah. Is he related to Box?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh.
No, he's related to Bean, I guess. He came to our house last night. He was limping something terrible. He told us that the night before he was stiff in 6 joints. Your father told him he ought to keep out of those joints. Stiff, that's an old word.
I don't know what show Mama's been watching.
I don't know. Your father told... Oh, I did that. Grandma...
Don't repeat it.
No, I better not. Grandma Og is still trying to get Grandpa to shave off his beard.
Yeah.
Oh, he's got a terrible beard, you know. It's so long, it's always getting him into trouble. Like last week, he was running for a streetcar, and he ran right up his beard and kicked all of his teeth out of it.
I hadn't heard that one.
They weren't even paid for yet. His beard is so big and bushy that Grandma has to kiss him through a straw. Think about that for a minute. Pretty dismal. Your father and I ran into Elsie Crack yesterday. Remember Elsie?
Yes.
Little-
That's Leonard Box's sister.
A little bitty woman.
Yeah.
Tiny little thing. Got this beautiful red hair growing way down her back.
Yeah.
None on her head, but all this...
It's quite a family. We've had Bean, Box, Crack, and...
There's more coming.
Oh, what's that more?
Let's see. Oh, my, but that girl is ugly, she says. She just can't get a man. She's been stood up more times than a bowling pin. And turned down more times than a bedspread. That's enough of that. One more strike and out. We told her she ought to send her picture to the Lonely Hearts Club. And she said she did send her picture to the Lonely Hearts Club, but they sent it back. They said they weren't that lonely. She's a horrible looking woman.
Yeah.
I love her. Well, son, I must close now and go help your father. He's in the hospital again.
Oh.
Poor Dad. He is suffering from 108 lacerations, 99 contusions, 87 bumps, and 52 nasty bruises. It seems he took a full swing on a golf ball in a tile bathroom. Naked.
Yes.
Love, Mama, and just in time.
Love.
That was pretty good.
So you know,
That
what's
was
really funny.
a lot
about this-
funnier than I
Yeah, it was.
imagined.
It was good.
Yeah.
You know, the funny thing is, while Cliff is here,
Right.
sometime before he leaves in '62, he's going to create a cartoon for television called Charley Weaver. Okay.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at this and thinking, this is something that, you know, Addressing Gettysburg, of course, has a beaver paraphernalia. And this was Charlie's, there's a picture of a Charlie face on a beaver, okay? And,
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, so anyway, we
See
can
if I can
share
find
that.
that.
You won't find it anywhere.
Oh, really?
No, it's only in the library of the Adams County Historical Society.
Oh, okay.
There's photographs of the sketches that he was doing for all the characters we just heard about in the animal form. So Crack, she was a peacock, okay? And one of them is a hound dog, the sheriff. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of funny stuff.
So these were like cartoons as in a newspaper, not
No, this
animated.
was going to be animated.
But it never was.
It never was, and there's only a couple announcements in the news about that he's creating this cartoon series because it's at the same time as Yogi Bear and all the other ones, right?
Okay.
And so he was going to do it, and Cliff was a really good sketch artist. I actually have an original book of all those characters he just talked about. I don't know what it's going to be used for. It's got his trademark on the bottom of the page for each one of them. It's all hand colored. So,
I think Charley Weaver would be more apropos today.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You see the
Yeah.
you see the connection here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I can
yeah.
see you taking that image.
If I could draw, I would revive Charley Weaver.
Well, let's use what they got. I'm sure the Stark.
They won't let me do that.
They will.
No,
I'll
no,
make
they
sure
won't.
they do it.
No,
they will.
Good luck.
Okay.
Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll work on it.
I'll just find somebody who could draw, and we'll just come up with our own.
And this was he actually sketched this himself. So
Yeah.
these are photos that Walt Lane took of the, of
the actual sketches.
I guess he was, he was sending those pictures then to the whoever was going to produce
The animator.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So
This is very fascinating. This whole thing here. Let's talk about this head.
okay, so it's really wax,
It is really wax,
and the rest of
starting
Cliff-
to melt under the hot lights.
it is. And Cliff Arquette is actually down, parked in front of Baltimore Street right now. The rest of him, because he's too hard to get up the stairs here. Okay, he's kind of heavy.
Is he heavy? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this head is heavy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Let me just hold you by the ear there, Charlie.
I'll tell you a funny story about him specifically at my house. So I live in Bergen County, Northwest Bergen, and we get a decent amount of snow every year.
Right.
And so several years ago, I'm home. I was in the fire. I've been in the fire department for a long time, and it was a friend of mine, Neil, who's a year younger than me in high school. He was on the department. It's a 10,000 person town, 1.5 square miles, something like that, whatever it is. Anyway, my friends have a landscaping business, but in the winter they do plowing, right? So I got a decent driveway, long drive. So they're going to plow. So she texts my wife at midnight, right? Hey, can I use your bathroom? This is my friend's wife, and she's driving the plow. So my wife says, sure, come on in. So I go out and I shovel the sidewalk in front of the house, the walkway, so she can get into the house without going through 20 inches of snow.
Sure.
So she comes
Very
in to
kind
go
of
to
you.
the bathroom, and I'm outside. Exactly, I'm a good guy. So anyway, she goes inside, and my wife's on the couch in the living room. It's a split level, so the bathroom, of course, is on the upper right side of the house. And my wife says, "Oh, second door on the right." My mom was living with us at the time, and she doesn't hear my mom. Mom says, "No, it's third door on the right." So my friend Tammy, she goes up the stairs, right? First door. They're all closed doors, okay? First door closed. She goes to the second door. She opens it up. There's no lights inside except her truck out in the street. Through the blinds and stuff, there's silhouettes of all these figures inside, all these people inside this thing. He's the one closest to the door. And she lets out this scream and an F-bomb and a few other things because she's scared to death. She didn't realize she opens this door. There's 20 wax figures looking at her in there. Okay?
Right.
So that's the funny story.
Here.
That's what?
You're Jeffrey Dahmer's fan.
And so my cousin,
Right.
Jeffrey Dahmer guy, I'm a Jeffrey Dahmer. So my cousin
Buffalo
Kurt,
Bill.
my cousin
you
Kurt
go.
was with me, at several of these auctions, of which this was one. I was successful. I know Eric Dorr wanted the figure, but I think I wanted a little more. And anyway, Kurt was with me when we went to the Civil War Wax Museum. That was the first one, right? That when they closed that, and they sold off probably about 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the figures there. And that's where I ended up with Reynolds and a Confederate soldier. And I actually have Grant, have him. And we bought, my cousin's a military collector. And so you like some of these, the Dorfman's people who made those figures back in the 60s, they actually used surplus real military stuff. So you bought the two
some
medical
insignia. It was
insignia.
on a fake uniform, but they incorporated some
Real
original
insignia.
buttons and insignia.
Okay.
So he bought that, and of course it was a half figure. So why? Because it was a guy in Farragut's ship during the Battle of Mobile Bay, but in the museum you only see the top half.
Sure,
There's
right.
no
So why
bottom
make
half,
the bottom
right?
half? Yeah.
And we call him the Screamer because his mouth is like that wide open. Okay, and we had
He's
a lot of fun
very
with that.
horrifying looking guy.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So
yeah,
we
he's
put him
half
in
a
the
guy with
car.
his mouth open.
We put him in the car
Well, you
looking
didn't have
out.
room for him.
Yeah,
Oh well.
yeah. Go ahead. You didn't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I took him home because he was too full of other figures, and I took him home, and no one else was home, and I put him in a chair in the corner of the room, and people come in and see this guy.
So we don't know who made this one because this one was in the in the Soldiers Museum. Cliff Arquette.
This one here.
Yeah.
So there's
That's-
more than one Charlie.
There's one that I have a picture of him standing at the one in Freedom Land. Now, it's possible it's the same head. It looks like the same head, but maybe not. But the hat, by the way, the hat, Charlie never changed it. Charlie never changed the hat. So flip it, yeah, so you can see the that's a souvenir hat.
There.
With his logo on there. But
says 80% reused wool, 20% unknown fibers.
That's him.
Unknown.
That's funny.
You got asbestos
But
all over your hands.
It looks like, what is it? Is this a leather hat band too, or
Maybe
no?
it is.
It's
Yeah, it
like
might
one of
be.
those fake ones.
Well, this is 1959 it was made. So
Right.
And he had a ton of souvenirs there.
Charley Weaver, original trademark
Yep.
by Fred J. Chantilly's
Yep.
of York, PA.
Yep.
Look at that.
So he sold a bunch of those, but the hat that he wears in the program, the one he does, what you just saw him with on Mike, what's his name show?
Merv Griffin.
Merv Griffin's show. That he never changed that. He said he insured it for $50,000. That hat.
Really? So he never had a duplicate. It was
Because
always
he never
that
could
hat.
make it exactly the way he wanted
Right.
it. So all those are $250 a pop for the suspenders, the pants, and all that stuff. He changed that a lot, but the hat he never changed. So
Well,
it was
once you
his
get
icon. It was iconic, man.
once you get a good hat, you can't
mess
go.
with it.
No, you can't, and that becomes your trademark.
It does, and it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
You know.
I
So.
wonder if David has that. It wasn't in the video.
Now, somebody has to have that. And,
but we don't
and he
know.
would have. I mean, it would have been with him in Hollywood. So maybe Lewis Mike had it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It certainly didn't. I didn't see it in either Patricia's collection or the one we just saw on video here.
So I asked you before,
Yeah.
if you've ever seen the movie Waiting for Guffman,
No.
and you said no, but Louis Arquette is in it, and he plays a Weaver-esque character.
Okay.
Which now to me is all the more amusing because it's kind of like his dad. So that was and I would imagine it's a Christopher. Do you know who Christopher Guest is?
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a Christopher Guest movie, and I would imagine that it would have been a tip of the hat to
his grandfather, his father.
Well, to Cliff from
Yeah.
Christopher Guest to tell Lewis, kind of base
right.
it. That's my guess. I
Yeah,
don't know,
probably is. Probably is.
But there's such great lines in that movie, such as this one.
I just hate you, and I hate your ass face.
And of course, this one.
Dybbuk schmibbuk, I said more ham.
So you definitely want to make sure that you
watch that movie.
you watch that movie, yeah. What else would you like to add about it? And by the way, folks, if you do have a question, call in 717-420-1978 before we wrap up here. But go ahead. Anything else?
No, I just, he loved this place. And
Yeah.
I really honestly believe that if he didn't end up leaving in 62, he would have stayed here the rest of his life. I really do believe. Because, again,
He left because of being on the Roy Rogers show?
That's basically
Being a regular.
Yeah, and I guess the relationship, something happened here. But again, Leroy brought him back. And he really loved Leroy loved him. I mean, it was a very close relationship. I mean, listen, Cliff knew a lot of stars. He was very close again to Jonathan Winters and Tennessee Ernie Ford. He was on Jim Neighbors. I mean, he knew all these people in Hollywood, and he molded that to help Gettysburg. Really, I mean, he, like I said, that point where he makes like some guy here locally asked me to put him on the program or, talk about his store or something. And he goes, look, you understand, we got X amount of time to do this. And it's like, I can't do that. I'm trying to get this battlefield stuff.
Right.
So this is the thing. I think we need to have some kind of recognition of Charlie and actually Leroy to some extent here. And I talked to the Gettysburg tour folks, and I think they're going to do something because most people, it's, even today, I work on the corner 59th and 10th at John Jay College, right? So I take the park and ride, take the bus into the city, into the Port Authority, and there's a statue of Jackie Gleason in front of the Port Authority bus terminal, a TV lamp put there.
Right.
And
the tour center could easily put one out in front of the front door, I think, right?
I think maybe we could do something.
Like a Leroy on one side and Charlie on the
maybe
other.
a bench. People could sit next to it or something.
Yeah,
so we
that's
did a lot
good.
of selfies yesterday. So Tim set up the chairs so that he sat in the middle and people could take their picture with him and stuff. So I think to me, that's the important legacy here. Listen, I understand growing up, with 14 saddles in my basement in my house. My father was a major cavalry collector and organized the first cavalry collectors group and stuff. So I get all that. I got to go as a kid. Some of your listeners know I've heard of Bannerman's. Okay, Bannerman's was a New York City-based Army supply company that existed from the 19th century well into the 20th century. They had a store in Lower Manhattan. My grandfather was both of them were bankers. One had worked at the Federal Reserve. It was right near Bannerman's. He'd pick stuff up for my father in that store. It was packed, loaded with artifacts. And we got a few things. I got a regimental standard, a chunk of one from that store. But anyway, as a kid, I got to go on Bannerman's Island itself. It's north of West Point in the middle of the Hudson River. And it was stock. You can't imagine what that.
It's a castle.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar. Yeah.
And I was in there as a kid, like a 10-year-old kid, going in there and looking at these stacks of leather stuff, water pouring through the ceiling. I mean, it was like unbelievable. My father went because he knew the owner, Jim Hogan, bought that company from the Bannerman family, and the state of New York held a gun to him. Basically, you got to give us this building. So he had to basically move as much out as he could. And it ended up going to Long Island. Mysteriously, that castle burned like not too long after that they moved out. So something happened there. I mean, it was an arsenal, so it had some ammo, I'm sure, in there and stuff.
Yeah.
But growing up as a kid, that was really interesting. But I understand to me, I see this balance between what Charlie did, bringing people here, and how are we going to remember that today? So we talk about things here, about battlefield preservation. No question, we got to do it. There's other pieces that Gary and the Battlefield Trust are picking up pieces here and there and stuff. Wonderful stuff. But we got to remember, though, we need the other stuff here, too, to draw the more general public here. You got the hardcores like we talked about earlier, but we got to keep drawing more people in because you don't want to make it so nobody comes here anymore. Then what's the point? Right?
Well, and somebody had commented before, and I think he mistook what I was saying about the attitude, being too stuffy now, or since Charley Weaver, I should say. And it seemed that he was making the point that stuffy attitude saves Gettysburg from overdevelopment. And I say, no, it doesn't. Because what it does is it turns people off from coming here and participating in things because nobody wants to feel like they're in school.
Right.
Unless it's preschool or kindergarten,
right?
Where you learn through play,
right?
Adults like that,
right?
And kids obviously like that,
right?
So when you have a guy like Charley Weaver, and when you have an attitude where it's okay to laugh, it's okay to be entertaining,
right?
While you're still doing this, because that's how you get through to people,
right?
That's not going to make a building. Look, Gettysburg's destroying itself already, putting a 7-story building up soon, in the middle of town. And we've had that
argument for a long time.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying we've lost the Charley Weaver way of approaching things, and still the development comes.
Right.
The surrounding area. You were talking before about how the GBPA was going on buying potentially developable land before anybody can get a hold of it as to create a buffer. That's all gone. Nobody does that anymore. It's all neighborhoods everywhere. Hers Ridge is destroyed,
right.
And it's just getting worse and worse everywhere you go. So, we think that we're preserving more, and we are, right? We're not developing. And like you say, the trust does a great job of getting a hold of land and saving it. Like they're the. I shouldn't say the only ones,
descendants
but
right.
But right. I don't know if they are the only ones who are doing that now, but they are certainly the most prominent doing, and they're doing the best job of it out there.
And they're not just Gettysburg. They're doing Revolutionary War now. They bought the chunk of Princeton, New Jersey.
They're all over the country,
right? And they only got limited funds of what they can do.
And it's amazing what they do with those funds, and so. It's still going on, but at the end of the day, this stays alive by capturing the new generation.
Right.
And I don't know. I've had a couple of meetings with some college age people, and I said, listen, I love doing this. I would like to do this if I can,
right,
till I retire.
Right.
But I don't want it to die with me.
Right.
I want somebody to take it and continue it.
Right.
I don't. This isn't a Matt thing. This is a everybody thing, right?
No, but you've created something that brings all these things together in one place, electronically.
But it's hit a ceiling. So, but what I'm saying is like I'm looking to reach the younger generation through working with the younger generation,
right.
But also to like find someone who's going to want to take this over and do
what you're doing,
what I'm doing when they're my age,
and take it to the next step.
Exactly, because I'm not going to be able to.
We don't know what this will look like 20 years from now, right?
It'll probably be gone, but you know,
no, I don't think so. But no, but a younger person who you draw in. That's the thing for me. Is I'm a college professor, and I'm the author of a firefighting text that's kind of the standard building construction book for the fire service, and it was essentially handed to me for the originator, and I've carried this torch because this guy was an icon to me. And so I'm in the position, he's passed away several years ago, so I'm just coming out with another edition of it and stuff. But I'm looking for the next guy right now, and I think I know who it is. But I need a younger guy that has the same philosophy that I have and same take on things, and realizes the most important things is that you have to carry this torch now.
Right.
And it may change its format, it may do whatever, but we got to keep this going.
Right.
And
that's what I'm saying.
Same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So.
And it's hard to do because, like you said, you have to have the same ideas or ideology about it and approach.
Yeah.
But they also have to be themselves
at the same time and take it where they think because that's what I'm doing right now. I'm thinking about what would this guy Frank think about this, and I'm like, I think this honors his core function, his core philosophy, I should say, of how to handle things. And so I've changed some things that I think keep it going in the right direction, basically, and stuff. So I understand that, and that's important. That's core to you, man. I'll tell you, that's at the center of what you do here. And again,
I try.
I'm a guy that just watches and listens to your program and stuff, but I think everybody realizes that this is an incredibly unique thing that you've got going here, and we all thank you for doing it. Because
thank you for liking it.
As an older guy, who's on the outer layer of the onion here, basically. I'm living on Baltimore Street. I mean, I'm a guy that's watching from afar. And I know you've got Australia, you've got all these other places because they love it, and you do a great job. So, but we got to keep it going. That's the thing.
We do, right. and the story is always going to be compelling, and it's always going to be there. And there's always going to be someone like yourself who hones in on a small aspect of the history of Gettysburg and becomes an expert on it and is interesting for content like this. And so I remember when I started this, people were like, how long can you do a show about a 3-day battle? And I was like, you have no idea. Like, there's more. First of all, those 3 days have 150,000 stories to tell, plus the civilians. And then there's so many years of history leading up to it and after it. Like, this is a very fascinating town.
It is.
And the area in general, it is it has a piece of every part of American history from the colonial days up that is fascinating, especially when you look at it in the context of the battle, right? The big thing that brings us all to it,
right?
The battle. Right. And then when you start digging, be it before the battle or after the battle,
right?
You realize, like, my favorite story. Tom McMillan has a book about the Fort McHenry,
right?
And Major Armistead is in command,
and his
nephew is
right.
going to be Lewis Armistead, who will die here,
right?
And but the thing that I find fascinating about this story is Major Armistead's wife is with child, and he feels battle is imminent, so he removes her from the fort and sends her to the safe care of their friends. Where? Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And then after everything passes over, he comes up to fetch her. And I often wonder, of course, he couldn't have known this, but to me, what I love about this story is he might have been coming up the Baltimore Pike,
right,
or the Taneytown Road. I don't know which way he came in, but he might have been coming up there and not realized that in a generation, his nephew will die
on that
right
field
where he's passing.
He's walking, driving, or riding right by,
right past.
Yeah.
And in an awful turn of history, this country that he is now defending from foreign invaders is going to tear itself apart from within.
Right.
And play it out up here and on 10,000 other fields across the country.
Unbelievable.
Like, he couldn't have known this.
No.
But to me, that's what gives me the chill. Is like, oh, Like, you know,
truth is stranger than fiction.
It is.
You know, it's like,
and there's so many coincidences.
so many of these here.
Yes.
Was people here, not here, you know, all that kind of stuff. So,
And that's why I say I love doing this, because the amount of material never ends, and especially when I think you came to me, right? I don't.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm a little bit of I'm a college professor, so I try to stay off of Facebook. Okay.
I don't blame you.
So, you know,
I do too.
And I accidentally hit the button. I did it the other day with the Lincoln Gettysburg Cemetery here. I don't know what I did, but anyway, it like sends you a message and like, hey, how can I help you? You sent back an automated message on Facebook, and then that's where we engage. And
Okay.
so
you accidentally contacted me.
Well, I'm glad
I
watch
you did.
your show all the time.
Yeah,
and
I
I
tell.
thought this would be kind of a cool episode for you to talk about.
Oh God, I love it. That you wanted to do it on Cliff Arquette is even better, because I've always been fascinated by him, and I want to learn more about it. So I mean, it
worked out.
It was
great.
very fortuitous, and it was a great accident to have had.
Right.
Glenn, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. And
Kurt,
thank you
thanks for joining him. Thanks for holding the head.
He's holding the head. He's also
Head of security.
Citadel graduate, right?
We
tried to get
started
the
Civil War.
Dahlgren. You saw the
Yeah, you
Dahlgren
did.
over at the Horse Soldier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So that came out of Charleston Harbor. So we were thinking about how do we get that back?
It's
to
only $100,000.
It's only $100,000.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh. It's a mere bag of shells. That's chump change. 100,000 for that, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. How the hell? What was it cost? It probably cost that much to move it.
Well, and
it was salvaged out of a river in the 1870s. I believe they were going to take a bunch of the guns off the battery in Charleston Harbor, and they loaded them on a boat, and it made it up the PD River, and it was overloaded, and 85 foot of water.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So they got-
there's some still there. You could
Actually, if you want to go there.
Oh, so if we could just go
Yeah.
bring it up.
it's not hard. Just tie some balloons or something.
Yeah, right. Like in Raise the Titanic. Did you ever see that
Exactly.
movie?
Yes.
Put the balloons on
Put a
it.
balloon on it.
And it comes up intact. Yeah.
Yep.
Little did they know.
Little did they know.
That's what was fascinating about that movie is Bob Ballard hadn't discovered the wreck yet. So we didn't know that it was in two pieces.
Right.
And so
They think it's all
so
one big
that
chunk.
movie makes it one ship coming up.
Yeah.
And Louis Armistead is in that movie. Richard Jordan, the actor.
Right. From Gettysburg. Okay,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
There's
a lot of connections.
Start talking about Charley Weaver, you end up with Louis Armistead. I don't know how that happens.
It's like Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, the 6 degrees of Louis Armistead. Oh God. Well, listen, I really enjoyed this. I could go on another 4 hours if you wanted to, but you know, you guys got to get back to Jersey, and I got to eat.
And he's hungry, so.
Yeah, and
There's nothing in
Charlie's
Jersey
hungry.
for us.
Let's give him one last look at Charlie here. The great Charley Weaver. It is great to have you, Mr. Arquette, Cliff Arquette. Great to have you here, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
There you go.
I wish I could do his voice. I can't. But there you go. That's it. Thanks for bringing him in.
No,
it was
thank
really
you.
cool.
Listen, this has been great. So
Good.
this is an honor seat that I'm in right now.
Oh,
I realize that.
And that's
I
true.
realize
A lot of honorable people have sat there.
And maybe we come
And
back
not so
another
honorable.
time with, we should talk about Leroy in detail, some more stuff about him.
Let's do that as the next one.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
because I think that would be great. And then what we were talking about before with the Arquette siblings.
Family.
Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rare Sunday edition of Addressing Gettysburg. Normally, I would make this a Patreon show, but I just thought this was so interesting that I'm like, you know what? Let's put it out for free on YouTube. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. All right, guys. Thank you.